Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
From the offices of B'nai Zion in downtown Manhattan, I'm Mark Golub, and I want to begin by putting a list on the screen for you, and I want you to think, I want you to determine what is the common link to all of these disparate things that I'm going to put up on the screen. What ties these all together? Watch. The Pentagon Papers, the resignation of Richard Nixon, the prosecutions of Dr. Spock, the Chicago 7, the Weather Underground, Patty Hearst, the movie Deep Throat, the Chappaquiddick tragedy involving a very young Senator Ted Kennedy, the attempted deportation of John Lennon, the draft case against Cassius Clay, who of course became Muhammad Ali, legislation to strike down America's death penalty, the Bill Clinton impeachment trial, hanging Chads, and the controversy over the Bush-Gore election results, Nelson Mandela, Natan Sharansky, and Jonathan Pollard, WikiLeaks, the O.J. Simpson trial, Klaus Van Bulow, Leona Helmsley, Mike Tyson, Woody Allen and Mia Farrow, the case against the cigarette industry, the Soviet Union, Italy, Israel, and China, President Barack Obama and President Bill Clinton, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Pierre Trudeau, superstars Marlon Brando, Frank Sinatra, billionaires Sheldon Adelson, Mark Rich, authors Saul Bellow, David Mamet. What's the common thread? The common thread is an extraordinary human being, one man, who perhaps more than any other on the American scene, certainly in our lifetime, is the prolific defense lawyer, an expert in American jurisprudence and constitutional law. This man's won more than 100 cases. Not one of his capital punishment clients has ever been executed. And it's why he's been called the winningest appellate criminal defense lawyer in history. And he, of course, is Alan Dershowitz, who has now written an amazing, gripping, just stunning book. And how many books have you written altogether? 30. Okay, this is his 30th book. He's written nonfiction and fiction, and I happen to love his writing. Many, many, many years ago, he did this book. It became a best-selling and a classic on the American Jewish scene and an American scene, Chutzpah. And he was kind enough many, many years ago, when we were both much younger, to come and talk to me about many ideas in Chutzpah. So lo and behold, now he's written what I mean, I don't know if you see it this way. I find this a compendium. I find this almost a journey that you're willing to take the reader on from this, younger. When did you write this? Remember the year?
Yeah, about 1990.
Okay, 1990. So we were both younger, but so what? And it was a fabulous, fabulous look into, again, much of who Alan is as a person, as well as some of the issues that drive him. And this is called Taking the Stand, My Life in the Law. And the whole purpose of this book is to give Alan a chance to express his views on a range of topics that are at the forefront of American Jewish life and American life, really American life, whether it's the death penalty, whether it's church-state relations, whether it's the First Amendment and how you protect it, and is it to be protected. All of these are chapters, and what I said to him before we started, every single chapter in this book could merit a program all of its own. And I want you to know also, you have a gift. I don't know where this comes from, maybe you'll tell me. You are a writer who writes in a way, it's a very easy read, but you engage the reader almost as if you're at my Shabbat table. You write as if you're in the room with me and you're just telling a story. And you bring us in, and it is just a fabulous read, a fabulous content. I want to thank you for this book. I'm going to say one more thing, and then I want to give you something out of journalistic integrity. Many books have been written in the last couple of years. And every now and then, I don't do books as a rule on L'chaim, but every now and then I think an author has done something so extraordinary. So we did Yossi Klein Halevi's book, we did Dan Reviv's book, and it's not about which is the best book. But if there was one book that I would want you to have in your home, it's Taking the Stand. And in all honesty, journalistic integrity, I'm a fan of this guy. And if you have been a regular viewer of L'chaim over the years, and I've been doing this since 1979, first on radio, then on television, you've heard me many times say, I have my own heroes that come out of the public sphere. And I begin with Jackie Robinson, and many of you were so kind when I did the interview with Rachel Robinson. It was a thrill for me. Jackie Robinson, Menachem Begin, Elie Wiesel, and Alan Dershowitz. And I grew up admiring what he stood for and how he brought a certain kind of critical eye, but a tremendous liberal perspective in the finest sense of liberal tradition to all the issues that were confronting American life. And then he became, over time, and I never saw this coming, it just happened, he became the most articulate defender of the state of Israel on the American scene today. And for all those reasons, I am an enormous fan of yours, and I'm almost done in this long-winded introduction. I know he has a very controversial personality. People love him, and there are many people who don't like him. And I want to talk to you about that in a moment because you address it yourself in the opening chapters of your book. And it is an extraordinarily honest book. It is frighteningly honest. I want to know whether your family was as comfortable with it as you may have been. But anyway, I'm not objective here. This is my hero, one of my heroes. And I don't understand why anyone on the American scene or the American Jewish scene doesn't understand that when the history of American Jewry, not this century, not the last century, the history of American Jewry is written, there will be key figures, and one of them will be Alan Dershowitz. And I should have said, by the way, I should have put up on the list, the last two things that should have been there is Israel's UN ambassador to the United Nations and the Shalom TV Board of Advisors, because Alan is on both. Alan was invited to be, you were invited to be Israel's UN ambassador.
That's right.
And you turned it down because?
Because I'm an American, and I didn't want anybody to argue kind of dual loyalty, conflicts of interest. I thought I could do a more effective job defending Israel as an American, as somebody who has the ear of presidents, the ear of secretaries of state. And so it was important for me to remain as I was an American. I love America, and to defend Israel from an American perspective.
All right, again, I don't want to mislead our audience. We have known each other for a long time. It's not that we see each other socially. I've never been to Martha's Vineyard to sit on that stoop while you play the game of
Can you top this?
Can you top this? We have never been to a Yankee-Red Sox game, but I have had the good fortune of being in your presence and at a table with you many, many times. And I just wanted you to understand that the way I appreciate you is the way I believe the overwhelming number of Americans and American Jews appreciate you. And for you now to come and sit and talk to me about this book is very gracious of you. Welcome back.
Well, thank you. 2 points I want to make. First of all, you get me when you say that my writing is conversational.
Yes.
I've tried very hard to do that. I grew up in Brooklyn, and a lot of the people I grew up with were really, really smart, but they didn't go to law school. And I learned how to talk to very, very smart people who didn't have a legal education, and not to talk legalese, but to talk Brooklynese. And I still talk Brooklynese, and that's why I interrupt people, let people interrupt me. It's my way of communicating. It works well with judges, it works well with juries, it works well with students, and I hope it works well in my writing. The other point You mentioned people love me or hate me. Recently there was an event at Harvard where I was honored for 50 years, and they had all the fancy justices of the Supreme Court sent videos, the president sent a letter, President Clinton sent a letter. But the most interesting one was a videotape from Larry David, my friend from Martha's Vineyard, who I sit on the porch with telling jokes. And Larry David is interviewed with his feet on the table, and he says, you know, there are two groups of people in the world. The people who know Alan Dershowitz and they really love him, they find him nice, he's easy to get along with. And the people who don't know him, who hate his guts. He said, I fit into a third category. I know Alan really, really well, and I hate him. And then he went, I hate him because he's too smart. I hate him because he knows more about sports than I do. I hate him because he tells better jokes. He goes on and on. But, you know, he directly went to that controversy. And, you know, in the back of my book, I have the only blurbs in the history of blurbs that start out with people who hate me. I don't read Dershowitz, President Jimmy Carter. Dershowitz is not very bright, Noam Chomsky. He's evil like Adolf Eichmann, Norman Finkelstein. Deranged, Glenn Greenwald. A war criminal, Professor Francis Boyle. An enemy of Israel. So, and then I respond to them. I'm controversial. I know I'm controversial. I might as well embrace it.
You know, the last time we taped you on Shalom TV in a public setting, not an interview where you and I sat together, was when you were at the Jerusalem Post conference at the Marriott Hotel, right. And you and Carolyn Glick, the Jerusalem Post columnist, go at it. You remember it?
Very well.
Okay. Sometimes people seem to say, why is he so bellicose? Why does he get angry? And they see it as arrogance. Why are you so arrogant that you think that you can tell other people? Are you arrogant?
I don't think I'm arrogant. I treat everybody equally. I don't suffer fools, but I don't ever pull rank. I will treat students like adults, and I'll tell them what I think. I'll expect them to tell me what they think. But I don't hold back my views. I don't really.
You don't hold back your views.
I don't.
You try to tell it like you see it, right?
Say exactly like I see it.
And you're not afraid of that, are you?
I'm not. And I say it whether it's a Chief Justice of the United States, the President of the United States, or a student. I want, you know, everybody to be treated equally intellectually. When I put together a legal team to work with me, I tell them I'm not the boss. I'm not in charge. The ideas prevail. The best ideas prevail. I take that from the Israeli army. In the Israeli army, you know, acharai, follow me, and people call the generals by their first names. And people don't pull rank. If you have a better idea, your idea will prevail. That's the way my legal teams operate. And that's the way I deal with people in my life. If I think I have a better idea than you, I'm going to let you know it. And I'm going to let you know I think it's a better idea.
And
if
you'll
you have
argue
a better
for
idea,
it as strongly as you can.
I will.
It's not personal, is it?
No, it's not personal. It can get personal sometimes if people are really anti-Semitic or racist or in any way representative of kinds of things that have persecuted the Jewish people for years. I'll let them know that I think that. I had just last night. Somebody asked me why I represent the terrorist state of Israel, and I just let him have it. And I let him know that that kind of phrase is unacceptable in American dialogue. And you know, call it anger, call it determination or willpower. I'm just going to let them have my full barrels. I tell a story in the book when I was up for a clerkship from the Supreme Court. My mentor, Alex Bickle, came to me and said, Alan, you'd be a great law clerk, but you have to close one of the barrels of your gun. Your dealings with the justice now. You have to call them sir. Don't treat them as equals. It's okay to treat your professors in law school, but remember they're your superiors. They're the justices of the Supreme Court. And so for a couple of years, I had to hold back a little bit, but not too much.
Mm-hmm. I'm surprised at one reaction people have to you, and I want to know if it hurts you and how you understand it. I talked a moment ago about your being a champion of liberal causes. Mm-hmm. You remain a champion of almost every liberal cause when there is a cause of a liberal nature versus a conservative nature.
Right.
But because you have become such a staunch, vocal advocate for the state of Israel, there are those in the liberal community who no longer see you as a liberal.
I would say there are those in the radical left community, people like Max Blumenthal, Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky, who regard me as a conservative. It's absurd. On most issues, I'm far to the left of Peter Beinart. Peter Beinart, for example, wants to have federal funding of parochial schools. I believe the separation of church and state prohibits that. Many of the most anti-Israel people don't support free speech for Israeli speakers. I support free speech for Palestinian speakers. I support a woman's right to choose abortion, complete equality for people who are gay. I'm against the death penalty. I'm a supporter of liberal candidates. But because I support Israel on college campuses today, I'm regarded as a right-wing neocon, a supporter of the Republican Party. I think I'd never vote a Republican in my life. But Israel, for many people, has become a litmus test of right-left. And though even on the Israel issue, I've been against the civilian settlements, I've been in favor of the two-state solution, I'm on the left liberal side within Israel of the Israel-Palestinian conflict. On American college campuses, many thoughtless people put me in the conservative camp. Look, that's what's going on. There's been a transformation. I'm a great supporter of human rights, and yet I'm regarded as an opponent of human rights by Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky, of course, supported the genocide in Cambodia. He was willing to tolerate 3 million Cambodians. He never spoke up about, as far as I know, about many of the genocides in Africa. He's a singular guy who hates America and hates Israel. So he hates me, and I love my enemies list. I thrive on my enemies list. That's why I put them in back of the book. You judge people not only by their friends, but by their enemies, and I'm happy to be judged by my enemies.
Coming back to the moment you had with Carolyn Glick.
Right.
Were you angry at her?
No, I wasn't angry at her. I was angry at the audience.
Yeah, let me put it differently. Was it personal?
No, I don't know Carolyn.
It wasn't personal.
No, I don't know Carolyn Glick. I was angry at the audience.
And you should explain to the audience.
First of all, before I got up, the audience booed Ehud Olmert, who is a great peacemaker. He was a Likud candidate, and then, of course, they created their own party. But I regard Ehud Olmert as a great patriot, and the people, many in the audience, booed him. And then when I talked about the two-state solution and I talked about compromise and peace, they booed me. And I pointed my finger at the audience and I said, basically, you're part of the problem, not part of the solution. You don't represent the mainstream of the American Jewish community or Israel. Israel, for the most part, favors the two-state solution, and you are well to the right of that. Basically, if you want to vote, make Aliyah and go to Israel, but don't tell Israelis how they should protect their own children from the threat of war. Israelis want to make peace, and don't make it harder for them to make peace. The same is true of many on the Christian right in America. They support Israel, and I admire them for their support of Israel, but they didn't want to give up an inch of land. They didn't want to end the occupation of the Gaza. They have to understand that Israel is a country, a normal country, and it has to make its own democratic decisions, and it doesn't need the pressure from American supporters.
All right, come now to your early years.
What a disaster, huh? My early years. I went to Yeshiva Eitz Chaim, and then I went to Yeshiva University High School. We called it BTA, Brooklyn Talmudical Academy.
Don't jump too fast. What was your name?
Avi. It's still Avi. It's still Avi. All my friends, my old friends, still call me Avi. When I hear Avi, I know immediately it's going to be one of my friends or my family.
You grew up in a traditional Orthodox home, correct?
I did. My family was strictly kosher, Shomer Shabbat. I went to yeshiva, wore kippah. We went to a modern Orthodox yeshiva. We did not have to wear the kippah while we played basketball. And we had cheerleaders with short skirts, and we looked, and we liked, and we danced. So it was a modern Orthodox yeshiva.
As you look back on those years, were they warm and wonderful?
They were a mixture. They were warm and wonderful in terms of my friends, but in my book I have a photograph of my report card. In my upper senior term, the first half, 60 with a round failure circle in mathematics, 60 with a round circle in physics, 65 in history, 65 in Hebrew, 80 in English, for a 67 average.
You should have been in shop.
I probably would have gotten a 60 in shop too. I was just a terrible student in high school, and I was suspended from the varsity basketball team for academic failure, not for athletic failure. And my principal, Rabbi Zuref, Orthodox principal, said to me, "Look, Dershowitz, you got a good mouth on you, but a Yiddish cup, a good brain you don't have. You should do something where you have to use your mouth but not your brain." He said, "I have two suggestions. One, you could be a conservative rabbi, or the other, you could be a lawyer." He couldn't even pronounce reform. By the way, Rabbi Zuref is still alive. I sent him a videotape for his 90th birthday, in which I congratulated him. I think he still thinks I'm a failure, but nonetheless, my high school was a disaster.
By the way, it's not simply you were not a good student. You were a troublemaker.
I was a troublemaker.
You were a troublemaker.
Yeah.
Why?
I didn't like the oppression of the yeshiva. I didn't like being told what to think. So, and you know, there was cheating in my high school. And I was running for president of the student government, and I exposed the cheating. And some of the teachers were complicit in the cheating. And I named names. And I didn't make a lot of friends. One day when I got a high mark on the history regents, my history teacher called me in and said, Avi, don't let it go to your head. You're a 75 student. You've always been a 75 student. You'll always be a 75 student. So I figured, if I'm going to be a 75 student, I don't have to work hard to get 75s. So I can flirt with the girls, tell jokes, play basketball. I didn't work hard in high school.
I don't want you to jump ahead. Okay, I want to tell you some of the things you wrote, and I want you to tell me how they influenced you.
Sure.
And again, I don't know what your experience has been now as an adult looking back on these years. For many people, their high school experience engraves a certain sense of identity on them.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found, which I didn't read in Chutzpah, you tell different things in this book, is I said to myself, Alan somehow transcended a self-image he had in high school. And I also said to myself, I wonder how much of that self-image Alan carries with him all the time. Is it a fair question to ask you?
Sure.
How much of the image of the student who was a C student, who was a cut-up, you formed a Jewish gang. You had your own jacket. And you say you didn't do it for violent purposes, but it was a gang. Yeah. You tell the story in the book that you cut class to go see David Ben-Gurion.
Right.
And I want to talk about that separately. But when you came back to school, you lied and said the reason you had been out of school was because you were at the
Brooklyn Dodger
game. And the reason you lied was?
Many in our school were very anti-Ben-Gurion because he was a secular Zionist, an atheist, not a believer. And our school were Mizrahi religious Zionists, and they didn't like Ben-Gurion.
So you knew you'd get a lesser punishment for being out for a Dodger game.
Good criminal lawyer.
You were, yeah, by the way, you were obviously had nothing to do with the grades, right?
Right.
Okay. But now I ask you, as you look back, as high school imprints a certain sense of identity on a human being, how much do you carry with you of that? How much do you fight it? Where is it in you?
You always fight it. I mean, most people's lives are a function of their high school years in some way. And I came to college with a chip on my shoulder. I was going to show those guys that I wasn't as bad as they thought I was. You know, my mother always said, get B's. She didn't want me to get an A because I'd be a school teacher. Great to be a school teacher. My mother didn't want me to be a school teacher. And don't get C's because that's a shanda. So I never got a B in my life. I went from C's and D's to straight A's at Brooklyn and then Yale Law School. And partly I think it was to show them, to really show them up. And some years ago I was elected Alumnus of the Year of my high school. They hardly graduated me, but they made me Alumnus of the Year because now they were proud of what I had done.
Absolutely, absolutely. By the way, just out of nowhere, when you read your book, you're introduced to Claire.
Yeah, an amazing woman.
Your mother.
Right.
You're introduced to your father, but if I'm not mistaken, you don't name him.
That's interesting. My father, Harry, was a very quiet person. And
am I pointing this out to you for the first time?
Yes, I don't know that that's true.
But what you do ultimately, but many, many pages.
Right.
It's my father, my father, my father.
Right.
Without telling the reader his name, although you know Claire's name from the very beginning.
That's interesting.
I found that interesting.
It's a Freudian slip. My father did not play as much of a role in bringing me up as my mother did. My father was one of these 7-day-a-week, very busy workers. Did not have a financially successful business. He had a little store on the Lower East Side, made a living, but never made a lot of money, and worked very hard. It's the 7th day of the week, of course. He woke me up early in the morning and said, we have to go to shul, but we can't talk in shul. Maturnish reden, you can't speak. And so...
There was a lot of maturnish in your life.
A lot of maturnish. In fact, my Judaism, unfortunately, was defined more by maturnish. You're not allowed to, than by what you should do. The glory, the joy. I had more of the oi than the joy of Judaism growing up. I love my Judaism, and I love being part of the Jewish community, but that didn't come from my early upbringing. It came from an appreciation later in life. I've now written a book, and now another book I'm writing on Bereshit, on the first book of the Bible, which I got seasoned. And I've written, pretty good books about it. I learned more than I thought I learned.
Mm-hmm. So as you're growing up now in terms of the Jewish identity, and this comes through, it seems to me, in the book,
Mm-hmm.
the maternist was, again, don't do,
Mm-hmm.
don't do.
Right.
At one point, you tell a story of how you get involved. I believe you signed a petition for the Rosenbergs.
I did, yeah.
And your mother tells your father to hit you.
Right, I had to get slapped.
And he hits you because your mother asked him to.
My mother dominated my family. My father didn't want to smack me. He was proud of me. My mother was afraid I'd get on some list. It would be on my permanent record. I remember this is the height of McCarthyism.
Yes.
And so, I call the Judaism I grew up with the Sandy Koufax Judaism. Why? Why is Sandy Koufax a Jewish picture? Because maternist, you're not allowed to pitch or work on Yom Kippur. It's not something Sandy Koufax did. We don't know what kind of a Jew positively Sandy Koufax was. We know something he didn't do. He didn't pitch on Yom Kippur. And that was the Judaism I grew up with. Don't eat anything without a U and a circle around it. Don't marry a non-Jewish woman. Don't do anything on the Shabbat. Don't, everything was a don't. For my grandmother, it was don't whistle, because that's what they do. Don't go to see an opera by Wagner. Everything was don't. And it was hard for me, if you had asked me in those days to define what the 10 most positive, important, affirmative aspects of Judaism, I don't think I'd know. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdov, justice, justice, must thou pursue. Ubachartu b'chaim, choose life. The joyous parts of Judaism were not part of my upbringing. Everybody was so afraid that you would violate the rules that the rules, the negative rules, became the essential part of how you were defined as a Jew.
We're jumping ahead now. As an adult, in the arc of your own life, what were the things that sort of opened up Jewishness and Judaism for you, so that you have I assume you have now a different view of the Jewish tradition than you were burdened with as a child?
It's interesting because probably the person who was most influential in redefining my Judaism was Elie Wiesel. We became very, very close friends and are still close friends. I had lunch with him just this past Monday with him and his wife. He was a man who took the most negative experience a human being could ever have, seeing his father die in his arms, seeing his family destroyed, living through the Shoah, being in Birkenau, and he made it into the most positive life. I mean, here's a man who lives life, who is affirmative, who affirms life, who defends every human rights in the world, who's there for the Kurds, who's there for the Armenians, who's there for the Rwandans. I mean, and he gave me a new way to look at my Jewishness, and he turned me on, of course, to the Soviet Jewry movement, which became a crucially important part of my identity. All through the late 60s and 70s and 80s, I would say 70% of my professional life was one way or another devoted to Soviet Jewry. I went to the Soviet Union many times, went to Israel on behalf of Soviet Jews, went to Italy, went to France, went to Spain, met with European leaders, went to the Vatican, pushed them very hard to help and support Jewish life in the Soviet Union, and ultimately immigration. The greatest human rights event, probably, the 2 or 3 of the 20th century. One of them was certainly the movement of more than 1 million Jews out of the Soviet Union to Israel and the United States, along with the end of apartheid in South Africa. Those have to be 2 of the greatest victories of human rights, and I was privileged to be part of both of them.
All right, well, we go back now to you as a child. We're almost done with this, you as a child. I don't know now, as you tell me the story in person, whether you had as lovely a childhood as I thought you did as I read your book. And I want you to try to give me as honest assessment as possible, because it sounds like you had, although you weren't a good student, it seemed like you had good friends.
I did.
And you did things that were fun.
I did.
And you challenged authority from the time it seems to me you were challenging authority from as early in your life as possible, including, by the way, theology.
Yes.
And you came up with a whole list of things that, I mean, it's just amazing to me what you created as a child in terms of your own relationship to a certain kind of Jewish
Sure.
fundamentalism.
Sure.
And so I want you to still reflect that a little bit more for me.
Well, I had a
what
lot-
was the best part of the Jewish element as you grew up in Brooklyn, a Brooklyn Dodger fan, by the way, yes?
Of course. Yeah,
and
Jackie
we do share
Robinson.
Jackie Robinson
Oh,
together.
yeah. No, I went to see him play. In fact, we got the rabbi to do a bracha for him when he first came to the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. We gave him a Hebrew name, Yaakov Ganov Babenj, Robin's son. And we got Rabbi Mirsky, who wouldn't ever accept baseball, shtus, you know. But we said a new person has moved into our community and he's just gotten a new job. Could you do a Mishaberach for him? We got a Mishaberach for Jackie Robinson. Next day he got a base hit. We were believers. We were believers. So we love Jackie
Did you
Robinson.
ever meet him?
Yes, met him and met his wife. And in fact, just this year, his wife gave me a baseball cap from the movie 42, signed by her. I also have in my office only 2 signed photographs in my office. Thomas Jefferson, I didn't meet him personally, but I have his signature, and Jackie Robinson, 2 of my great J heroes. So we share that in common. We share Elie Wiesel in common as heroes. But, you know, Jackie Robinson played an important role in all of our lives growing up. If Jackie Robinson could play second base for the Brooklyn Dodgers, we could do anything. And look, we were lucky. We grew up in a booming economy, post-war. We grew up experiencing the end of anti-Semitism in America. You know, there's a great bumper sticker at the Harvard Business School, never confuse brains with a bull market. We grew up in a bull market. We were lucky. Today, I could never get into college with my high school grades. I'd be selling shoes in Brownsville. I'd be a good shoe salesman. I think I'd sell you more shoes than you need. But I would not have been a lawyer if I grew up today because I couldn't get out of high school.
Yes. But I don't think you're right. I think you somehow would have found a way. You're 9 years old in 1948 when the State of Israel is established.
Right.
Talk to me about how your family and you experienced the creation of the State of Israel.
Oh, it was a wonder. We had a tiny little 10-inch television set, and my father, in this case Harry, and I, and my mother, sat and watched the debates. Of course, Abba Eban was our hero. I try to imitate him. I try to be as eloquent as he was when I was a kid. I could never get the South African accent quite right, but a remarkable, remarkable man. I met him also. I was so privileged to meet Menachem Begin, Ben-Gurion, so many of the Israeli leaders. And the establishment of the State of Israel was a miracle. Our first club wasn't a gang, it was a club, although we tried to emulate the Italian kids in the neighborhood by, you know, rolling up our sleeves and wearing cigarettes. We called it the Palmach. And we sang the Palmach, you know, Rishonim tamid anachnu tamid anu ha-Palmach. So we identified clearly with Israel's struggle for independence. I went to Camp Masad in 1948. The counselor in the next bunk was Noam Chomsky, then a rabid left-wing Zionist. And we heard announcements all the time. 48, this is the summer of 48. The war was going on. I remember 2 things. 1, the casualties, and second, Hayom met Hatinok Ruth. Babe Ruth died today. That was an announcement made in the summer of 1948 in Hebrew over the Camp Masad loudspeaker. And then I remember we had a lot of Israeli counselors in camp, and occasionally one would come back crying. People don't remember that 1% of the Israeli population was killed in the War of Independence. 1%. You know, no war ever has had that high a percentage in America or anywhere else. 1 out of every 100, including many Holocaust survivors, including many like the people who surrendered at the Etzion block, who were with their hands up, slaughtered by machine gun fire, including many doctors who were on the way to Hadassah Hospital who were murdered by terrorists. And yet the Palestinians have the nerve to call that the Nakba, their catastrophe. They started it. This was a self-inflicted Nakba. They had a 2-state solution handed them by the United Nations. They had a state much, much bigger in functional land, in arable land than Israel, and they gave it away. They fought against Israel. They killed 6,000 Israelis, and they call it the Nakba. Talk about chutzpah. What arrogance.
As you now look back on the journey you had through your teen years, do you feel that your Jewish identity was shaped more by a certain sense of Zionism and Jewish culture and Jewish peoplehood than by Judaism and Torah?
It's a mixture. Look, the Jewish community is a religiously based civilization. I love Mordechai Kaplan's concept. You can't separate the religion from the culture. I am very influenced by the Torah. I've always said if God actually wrote the Torah, he was an underachiever. I could have used some editing. The stuff about a man who goes with another man should be killed, I'd cut that out. There are a few other things I'd cut out. But if it was written by divinely inspired human beings, wow, what a document. If I were ever stuck on a desert island with my students and had only one book I could use to teach them law, philosophy, morality, the Bible. And if I only had one book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. I could do it all in the book of Genesis. You know, book of Genesis, the common law, how it develops, how human experience interacts with law. If you look at the stories of the book of Bereshit or the book of Genesis, every one of the 10 Commandments, which is the codification, can be found in the experience of the Jewish people in the book of Genesis. I could teach course after course just out of that book. So I love the Torah. I love the Bible. And by the way, that's my next book. I'm writing my next book. It's called Avraham, the world's first, but certainly not last, Jewish lawyer. And
very good.
It starts out with Avraham.
Very good.
Shaking his finger, Chalila lacha hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. How dare you, God, the judge of all the world, not do himself justice, arguing about the sinners of Saddam. I love that story.
Yes, but I don't want to go on Torah right now because you and I would spend the rest of this time together. But it is, for anybody who understands Torah with Midrash as well, it is, I get chills just hearing you and talking about it.
Midrash
it is the most
insight.
Isn't it
so
amazing? Did you study Midrash as a kid?
I never did.
Is it fair to say, by the way, you, to this day, whatever your respect and regard for the Jewish tradition and Torah is, you do not believe Sinai, that it was literally given by God?
Well, it depends on what you mean, Sinai. I'm
no,
prepared to believe inspiration. I don't believe that somebody went up to a mountaintop and the story of the tablets. It's a beautiful story. It's a wonderful story. It's metaphor. But it's not, I don't think the Bible was intended to be taken literally. There are so many beautiful metaphorical stories. And remember, time in the Bible gets compressed. Achareya dvarim ha'ela, when? After these things, at some point. Or how, in my new book, I'm going to ask how you can reconcile the Abraham who sticks his finger, the Dersh character, Abraham, the guy who's on, God, how can you do this? With the Abraham says, you want me to kill my son? Sure, no questions asked. Those are hard questions, though. It's hard to reconcile the Abraham of Saddam with the Abraham of the Akedah, and I try to do that.
Mm-hmm. Of course, by the way, it is also a metaphor. There was no God who ever told a father to kill his kid.
I would hope not.
All right. But your learning goes far beyond Elie Wiesel. You now have an embrace of this whole Jewish tradition. And what I mean by embrace, an understanding of it.
Well, I'll never equal Elie Wiesel's learning, but my learning goes beyond just admiring Elie Wiesel.
Right.
Yeah, it's been a continuous process. There was one period of time where I guess I was so turned off by my high school experience where I just didn't want to think about it at all. But for the most of my life, I've tried to acquire more knowledge about Jewish heritage and Jewish tradition. For example, I'm now working on a project about Jewish law over the centuries. It's fascinating. Every single question that I address in my criminal law class has been addressed by the Jewish philosophers and rabbis over time. I don't always like their answers, but their questions are always brilliant. Just the other day, in my criminal law class and in my ethics class, we were dealing with what do you do if you have to sacrifice one human life to save many human lives. And of course, I talk about the story in the Talmud when the Roman generals captured the walled city and said, hand over one Jew or we'll kill the entire city. And that great debate that ensues about whether you can do that. That very problem came up during the Shoah, obviously, and it comes up every day in life. So every question that we ask has been addressed in the Talmud. And to ignore that is to be ignorant.
Do you have an answer, by the way?
I never have answers. And my job is not to provide answers. I'm a professor. My job is to show that your answers raise new questions. Okay.
And you became, by the way, the youngest full professor at Harvard, correct?
It's amazing when I think about it. At 25, I was an assistant professor of law at Harvard. At 17 and a half, just 8 years earlier, I was one of the worst students in the history of a mediocre high school, and suddenly I'm an assistant professor at the greatest university in the world. What happened?
All right.
My mother used to always say, what happened? What happened? How did you change so much?
Do you, by the way, when you see the arc of your life, do you get a kick out of it?
I do. Oh, yeah. And, that's why I say in the beginning of my book, you're not going to read false modesty in this book. I start with the story of the rabbi at Yom Kippur, who prostrates himself and says, God, I have nothing before you. And the chazan says, he's not. He says, God, I am even more than nothing. And the Shabbos looks at the rabbi and says, God, I am nothing. And the rabbi turns to the chazan and says, look who thinks he's nothing. False humility. I hate that. It's a form of literary perjury. So you're not going to read any false humility in my book.
Okay. So also you say at the beginning of your book, you believe if somebody is going to write an autobiography, it should be the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Right.
As you look now at your life as a parent,
Right.
were you able to share with your children whatever your feeling is for Jewishness and the state of Israel that you had?
No, of course not. And everything is generational. I grew up at a time when the Shoah was going on, Israel's independence, the war of 1967. So my exposure to Jewishness and Jewish values inevitably is going to be different. My children, grandchildren grew up during the invasion of Lebanon, the Intifada, campaigns against Israel on college campuses. All my children and grandchildren admire Israel and support Israel, but in different ways than I do. Their Jewishness is different than mine. I made a decision not to try to impose the way my parents imposed their maternist Judaism on me. I made a decision not to try to impose it on my children. My children are very proud of their Jewish heritage and very supportive of my work on behalf of Israel, but their lives are different. Their attitudes are different. Look, I think of all the Jewish leaders that I can think of, whether it be Herzl and Ben-Gurion, almost none of them were able to transmit exactly. I didn't try. My goal, I rejected when Justice Goldberg tried to transmit to me all of his values and tried to remake me in his own image. And I didn't try to create in my children replications of me in my own image. All of them are different, very consciously. All of my children are different. I love and admire them all. They do great, great work. And my grandchildren, both of them are students at Harvard. They're both brilliant students. They're great athletes. They're Hale Fellows. They're very popular among their peers. But their views and mine, and we argue. I had dinner with my grandson just the other night, and we were arguing about wonderful issues, and I just loved it. My grandson's the only person in the world who ever called me boring.
You'll learn. The choices you made. For example, did you choose to have Shabbat dinner in your home every Friday night?
I chose to have Shabbat dinner on many Friday nights, but since it wasn't a religious obligation, it's better if it's a religious obligation.
It is better.
Of course. Look, I wish I could be a firm believer. It would make my life so much easier if I believed that life came with an instruction book. I was cursed. And how did I know I wasn't a believer? I discovered it. I didn't decide it. I tell the story in the book. One day I was in an airplane. I took my son to the University of Colorado to be a freshman. What day could be happier in a person's life than taking a child, your oldest child, to be a college student? Got on the airplane, and the pilot basically told us, we are very likely to have a crash landing. We may die. We need people who are experts in disaster control to come and, we have 50 minutes and prepare, and they gave us all the instructions about how to prepare for a crash landing. We had to take off our belts, our glasses, high-heeled shoes, anything. And I had 50 minutes to think. And in the 50 minutes, it never occurred to me to think about God. It just didn't happen. I didn't make a decision, but I never made deals. I wrote letters to each of my children during that period of time, hid them as much as I could in the cases of my shaving kit, so maybe they would survive if I didn't. And I discovered that that part of Judaism was not central to my life. It was a discovery. It was an insight. You know, some people get a calling. They feel God calling. I felt the opposite on that plane ride. People say there are no atheists in a foxhole. I'm not an atheist, by the way. I am very clearly an agnostic. I don't know. When I was, I forget, 13 or 14 years old, I composed a prayer. It's in the book. Baruch atah Adonai. And
I love it, Alan.
You know, and then I went on and on. Why not try? Baruch atah, why not try? Baruch atah, why deny? Baruch atah, and I went on and on and on. My own skepticism came very early in my life. And I've always been a skeptic. I'm a skeptic about science. The fight I had with my grandson the other night was about evolution. I said, I cannot explain various things that evolution purports to explain. I think it's an incomplete theory. Doesn't mean I believe that there was a creation. I just don't know. I am happy in my lack of complete certainty.
In your experience with Judaism, are you comfortable with my saying that agnosticism, living with doubt, is what the rabbis understood the Jew to do?
Well, I think it's certainly an element of Judaism. I think struggling with eternal questions, which I struggle with all the time. The God I wonder about is the Jewish God, without a doubt. The God I criticize when I say, why? Why the Holocaust? How could this have occurred? I shake my finger at the Jewish God who, and then I give him a pass. Say, well, maybe you don't exist. If you do exist, though, you got to explain. I don't like the God of Job. The God of the book of Job says, how dare you question me? Where were you when I created the world? Do you make thunderbolts? I like the God of Bereshit, the God who regrets.
As you look back at how you and your wife raised your children, would you do it differently in any serious way when it comes to the Jewish dimension of their lives?
I think I would do one thing differently. I'm not regretting anything, but I would do one thing differently. I went to Jewish summer camp, and it had an incredibly positive effect on me. I went to a variety of Jewish summer camps, Camp Sedgwin, Camp Lebanon, Camp Eton, Camp Maple Lake, which I spent the last 4 or 5 years of my camping life at. Great experiences, and also it gave me a sense of real self-confidence because I was as bad a student as I was. That's how good a camper I was, or counselor I was. I was great in camp. I was the color war general. And it was very successful, and it gave me validation. So I wish my kids had had more exposure to Jewish summer camp. One of my sons went to Camp Sedgwin, and I think it really had an effect on him. We sent my daughter to Camp Ramah, but she went for a bad summer, and she had a bad experience in Camp Ramah. I wish she had had a better experience in Camp Ramah. So Jewish summer camp, I think, is something I wish the kids had been exposed to. I also wish there were better Jewish day schools. You know, I've traveled the world, and I've seen Jewish day schools in South Africa, Jewish day schools in Australia, Jewish day schools in Canada, Jewish day schools in England. They put American Jewish day schools to shame for the most part. They are the superior schools in each of those countries. If you want to go to the best high school in Australia or in South Africa, you want to pick a Jewish high school. They have the best teachers, they pay the most money. Today, in most American Jewish day schools, parents compromise. Look, it's not quite as good as Horace Mann or Columbia Prep, but it is Jewish, so we'll send them there. Now, there are exceptions. Ramaz is a great, great Jewish high school. Frisch, great Jewish high school. There are a few. There are some available. The Adelson School in Las Vegas is as good as any school around.
But they're atypical.
But they're atypical. In too many parts of the country, you have to compromise to send your kid to a Jewish day school.
And Jewish day schools right now are facing enormous financial difficulties.
Of course, and they shouldn't be, because the Jewish community is wealthier than it's ever been. And we ought to be putting more of our finances into Jewish day schools. You know, people ask me all the time, should the Jewish philanthropy be given to Israel or to the United States? That's not a division. A strong Jewish community in America helps Israel. When I turned down Bibi Netanyahu's request to become the ambassador to the UN, I said, I can't do that, but what else can I do for Israel? And he gave me a very good answer. He said, strengthen the American Jewish community. That's the most important ally Israel has.
If you were able to give advice to Jewish parents who presented you with the following Jewish dilemma that so many of us face. We have our Jewish children. We love them dearly. We want them to find fulfillment in an open American society. and find personal happiness and satisfaction in whatever they do. And we certainly want them to be open to the experience of meeting all peoples, some of whom they may fall in love with, even if those people they fall in love with are not Jewish. And we're not going to keep them now in some kind of hermetically sealed Jewish container. At the same time, many, many, many Jewish parents hope, wish, and even convey to their children. They hope their children want to marry, choose to marry, not because they have to, but choose to marry somebody else who is Jewish, create a Jewish home for their children, find the Jewishness of their own style, but it will be within the Jewish people, and then raise another generation, the parents now grandchildren, as part of the Jewish people. And so many at the moment are living in an experience where there's almost no family that does not experience some form of intermarriage. And within the Orthodox community, especially within the modern Orthodox community, there's a new developing trend where many modern Orthodox young people meet non-Jews and they convert, the non-Jew converts. But there was once a time they were not dating non-Jews who had then to convert. And I'm asking you as you look at this, and you've had this experience in your own life as well. And I say also, there are those who would argue, well, Mark, you're being too soft. That what the Jewish parent has to say, even today, you will grow up, be in the world all you want, but when it comes to choosing someone to date, you will only date a Jew, because if you only date a Jew, you'll only marry a Jew. And it's important for you to carry this tradition on, and then in some way you are betraying both the past and the Jewish future if you don't. That's the other side. But as you would, if I put you in front of 500 young parents, what's Alan Dershowitz's advice for how you deal with your kids as they enter their early 20s, middle 20s, and now people get married in their 20s and 30s? What's your advice, Alan?
It's the question I'm asked more than any, particularly by Harvard parents.
Interesting.
Kids come to Harvard. That was their dream. They worked so hard in high school. They're at Harvard. They're not at Yeshiva University. They're not in New York. And they're going to meet people from every possible background. They're going to be assigned randomly to a roommate. The roommate probably won't be of the same religion. I have to tell you, there's no formula, and I see friends who are deeply committed to send their kids to Jewish day school, who send their kids to Jewish high school, to Jewish camp, and some of those kids end up marrying non-Jews, and I see others who have totally secular backgrounds, they end up with Jewish spouses.
No guarantee anymore.
There's no guarantee. There's no inoculation. There's no formula. There's no way of doing any assurance. Look, in my generation it was easy because nobody wanted to marry a Jew, except today everybody wants to marry a Jew except apparently another Jew. So there's going to be more intermarriage. That's a reality of life. I think the lecture doesn't work anymore, what I call the guilt-gelt approach, making you feel guilty and then saying, I'll cut you off from your guilt, from your financial resource. That doesn't work. Kids just react to that. I think, first of all, the Jewish community has to be much more open to the possibility that there will be mixed marriages. And we have to be more welcoming to the non-Jewish spouse. We have to make sure that they are welcome into the congregation, that they can do it on their own terms. Some convert, some don't. Some are prepared to raise their kids Jewish without converting. We have to be much more open and welcome. Today, it's a struggle for the hearts and minds and souls of people, and we have to fight the battle using every bit of ammunition we have available to us. And I agree with your soft approach, because the opposite approach is just going to alienate.
Do you worry for the future of American Jewry?
Look, I hope that the greatest worry the Jewish people have has to do with our own internal issues. As long as spare us the external threats, spare us Iran's nuclear weapons, spare us the kind of anti-Semitism we're seeing in upstate New York today and in European countries, spare us the aggression, spare us the anti-Semitic, we'll solve our own problems. As long as Jews are left to solve their own problems, I'm happy. It will make me retire younger, because my fight is against external enemies of the Jewish people, physical enemies of the Jewish people. That's where my fight occurs. Within the Jewish community, we'll solve our problems.
At the same time, it looks to me as if, and I want to hear what you have to say, it looks to me as if the experiment in American Jewish pluralism has not been as successful as we hoped it would be, and that it seems that the further Jews are away from where you began, that there is, as Kaplan points out, a religious center to the Jewish people. That the further people are away from, and now I'll use the term orthodoxy, something that you rebelled against. The further we are from that, it looks as if, and you wrote it in The Vanishing Jew, it's substantiated by the Pew Report, that basically the further Jews are from the core of Jewish life, of Shabbat and Kashrut and Tefillah in a certain way, even though I don't want to impose that on any Jew. The reality is that the further away we are, the less cohesive the community is.
There's no doubt about that.
Okay.
I have no doubt about that at all. Who was it that said, I can't remember, Achad Ha'am, I think, said, it's not so much that Jews have kept the Sabbath, but that the Sabbath has kept the Jews.
Correct.
There's no doubt in my mind that if you want to make sure your children remain Jewish and marry somebody Jewish, there are two things you can do. Move to Borough Park, become a chassid. Of course your children will marry Jews. They'll probably marry another chassid. The second, make aliyah. Go to Israel, because they'll only meet Jews if they go to Israel, and they'll marry another Jew. That Jew may be an atheist, may be very anti-religious, but almost certainly will be circumcised and will be a Jew if it's a male. But
you don't want either of those for yourself.
No, and that's why.
And you don't want it to be a prescription.
That's right. And so the answer is, it's a paradox. Judaism is a paradox. The survival of Judaism is a paradox. Mark Twain couldn't understand it. I can't understand it. And, you know, I named my book, The Vanishing American Jew, as homage to a very bad article in the Saturday Evening Post called The Vanishing American Jew, which predicted Jews would vanish. And I said in my book, Saturday Evening Post has vanished. Jews are doing pretty well. And I think we'll thrive and survive. The greatest threat to our survival was the Shoah. The second greatest threat to our survival in this generation is an Iranian nuclear weapon, or a massing of all the Arab nations against the 6 million Jews now live in Israel. So if we can survive external threats, we will survive internal risks and paradoxes. We will solve that problem.
Amen v'amen. Alan, you've been a treasure your entire career, and again, I hope it goes to 120 and then some. The book is Taking the Stand. It's Alan's 30th book. It's an easy read. It's a wonderful read. It makes you think. It makes you feel.
It's a good Hanukkah present.
A great Hanukkah present.
Right.
And the present you've given me always is that you always say yes to me and come on it.
Well, you're terrific.
I thank
you
you
always
very
ask the best questions, and you always have, you know, such a nice approach to me and to your audience that I really enjoy being on the show.
I'm very flattered. Thank you. My conversation with Alan Dershowitz, author of Taking the Stand. Again, I really know there are those of you who already love him, and maybe those of you who didn't love him before love him now more. And as always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the things that Alan and I discussed here on L'chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And if you want to be in touch with Alan yourself, you can email me and I will forward your emails on to him. My thanks to B'nai Zion. They do a fabulous job serving the state of Israel, and they make us so welcome here in New York. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub, L'chaim, my friends, to life.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.